So after that big build-up, you're going to be disappointed. But thank you, Alan. Thank you for your inspiring words, for your great information, and great ideas about how to approach and work on this problem. I'm sure that many of us will be back to you to look for more information about this. Before I go any further with introductions, I want to introduce a special person among us. Senator Jeannie Cole-Wells, I understand, is in the audience. Senator Cole-Wells, if you're here, would you stand, please? Senator Cole-Wells is a very influential member and leader in our state legislature, and we really appreciate having you with us today at this conference. Are there other elected officials here who've not been introduced? Okay. So I just want to say again, and it's been said several times, but to the Council of Presidents, thank you for organizing this conference. I think it's a very important, very special issue. Representing the community and technical colleges in the state, there are 34 of us. We represent about 60% of the students within higher education. And although many of us, or most of us, don't have residence halls, we certainly are dealing with this issue on a day-to-day basis, both on our campuses and within our communities. So it's a huge problem for us as well. I want to move into introducing our next speaker. And Alan said in his words that the military is out front on this issue. All of us have certainly read about issues of sexual assault within the military, and I know that they have taken special efforts. And my understanding is that Joint Base Lewis-McChord has taken special efforts in this field. So I look forward to hearing the comments from our next speaker. Major General Kenneth Dahl is the Deputy Commander of 1st Corps and Joint Base Lewis-McChord. I always have to read that now because I grew up in Tacoma, and for years and years it was Fort Lewis and McChord Air Force Base. So now it's Joint Base. Major General Dahl, as you can read in the bio in your handouts, has had many leadership assignments in Germany, in Korea, in North Carolina, in Hawaii, New York, Belgium, Oklahoma, the Pentagon, tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and over that time has accumulated numerous awards and decorations. Major General Dahl holds an MA in social psychology from the University of North Carolina, an MA in national security and strategic studies from the U.S. Naval War College. And I had an opportunity to meet General Dahl just before this gathering, and he said that the thing that he wanted me to say about him, and which I think is important to note, is that he's had experiences in several academic settings. He taught at the U.S. Military Academy, at the University of North Carolina. He was a fellow at Harvard University, and affiliated with the Brookings Institution. So he's not unfamiliar with our academic environment. So it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce to you Major General Kenneth Dahl. Major General.
Thank you very much, very generous. And from the introductions, you can see that I've bounced around quite a bit over the last 32 years in the military. And I've been here in the Pacific Northwest for a little over a year, so I certainly am not an expert on the state of Washington or on Joint Base Lewis-McChord. But it does qualify me to make judgments about how things here are relative to other locations. And I say in all sincerity that the state and the Joint Base really are out in front and perhaps leading the nation, in getting after this. I do want to thank President Young and the university and the Council of Presidents for including us in this. This is really great. We have a pretty strong relationship with the University of Washington. and we take advantage of that as often as we can, but we rarely get to go out to the other universities from across the state. So it's particularly and especially valuable for us to be here because we are now speaking to a much broader audience from the state of Washington. Anna Marie, I want to agree with you that it's important to have women speaking. I think it's also important to have men, and I'll point out that you said it so forcefully that it's taken the rest of the morning for us to balance out your comments. But I am the last of the men to talk on this topic. But it is important to have men speak about it, leaders to speak about it, and to speak very forcefully and strongly about it. Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Johnson, if you could just stand up very quickly, please. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson runs our program at Joint Base Lewis-McChord, and following this is our breakout session, and we've brought up a team of folks, and you'll see that Stephanie's gathered the leaders, and it's about a balance, I think, of women and men. In fact, I think if you include my driver and my aide who are in the back there in the sharp-looking uniforms, we probably have more women than we do men on our panel. But so thanks very much for having us. We do have a concern in the Army, and one of those is that we become increasingly isolated from you, from the American public, from the broader public. So we work very, very hard at combating that because we cannot afford for that to happen. As was mentioned by Alan, I mean, we're your Army. We do the things that you ask us to do. We'll be as big or as small as you want us to be. We'll go places where you want us to go or we won't. So it's really important that we stay connected to you. And there is a concern in the military and in the Army that we become disassociated and disconnected from you. So even here in Seattle, although it's much closer to JBLM than those of you who had to travel long distances, we can become disconnected. So you'll notice that I arrived at the very last minute this morning. All the other folks left much earlier than I did. I thought I had enough time for traffic. I'm in the habit of leaving earlier. And then you end up getting here an hour beforehand. So last time I did that, I went into a coffee shop, and I had plenty of time, so I bought going to buy a cup of coffee, and the gentleman said, "Let me buy that for you, and I want to thank you for your service in the Coast Guard." And I said, "All right." So, and that's a true story. So we do need to do a better job of staying connected, I think. But seriously, we can't afford to become disconnected. I just want to take a few minutes here before the break and before we get into the real work where folks can interact more and roll up their sleeves to say that I think we do have a lot in common, believe it or not. The military and the university and educational and academic settings. And I think that we can do a lot of work together on this topic. For example, we recruit from the 17 to 24-year-old population across the United States. I'll share you one interesting aspect of that is that only 28% of that population right now across the United States is capable of joining the United States military. 28%. That's 72% cannot join the United States military because they haven't graduated from high school, or they have a criminal record, or they're on a psychotropic drug, or they're obese, or they have some sort of behavioral health or medical problem. That's pretty incredible. So we're recruiting from a pretty small percentage of that 17 to 24-year-old population, but that does comprise, the majority of the people that we have on the base, and I think that that's somewhat similar to the situation you have on your campuses. It's also true that I'm obviously not 17 to 24-year-old, and many of the people who run those campuses are also not 17 to 24-year-olds. So there is a generational thing between layers of leadership at echelon and the majority of the people. So it's important for us to close the gap in terms of understanding each other there. There is a hierarchy, certainly. You have the president of the university. We have the commanding general, of which I'm his deputy. You have your various campuses. We have our various divisions. You have your department heads, and we have our brigades. You have your dorms, and we have our barracks. You have your residence assistants in the dorms, and we have our platoon sergeants and first sergeants in the dorms. So I think there's some similarities there as well. We do get our guidance and our policy from the executive branch. For us, it flows through the Department of Defense, and for you, through the Department of Education. and other agencies as well. You have your governor and senators, and we have our Secretary of the Army. Congress and the Congress and the media certainly hold both of our institutions accountable, and that's correct. They absolutely should do that, and they make us better for it. And that is where we get our authorities from, and it is also where we get our resources from. So we share plenty. We also share this problem and this challenge, of sexual assault, which is rising and is completely unacceptable and puts our mission and our vision at direct risk, but then also indirectly if we were to lose the trust of the people. And I think that is absolutely true, for your organization as well. So we do have a lot in common. So what can you learn from the military? Well, let me just tell you that an awful lot of what we're doing, we're making up as we go along, truly. I think there are some things that you can learn from us. And the first thing I would ask you to do is learn from our mistakes. We have been under a lot of pressure to get after this on a very, very rapid timeline, perhaps an unrealistic timeline. And that's caused us to just get out in front of our own headlights and do some things that weren't quite sure was going to work, and they didn't. And it's just as important for you to know what hasn't worked for us as it is to know what has worked for us. And we'll share that. We'll share all of that with you. So being military people, what we've done is we've taken things that we are comfortable with and things that we've been good at and methodologies and processes that we have learned and are tried and true for us in our contingency operations and the things that we do in the military, both training and in combat. And we've tried to identify which of those processes and things can be applied to this challenge. And then, of course, we have to modify them in creative and imaginative ways. I'll just share a couple of those with you. One is our concern for force protection. Typically, when our military people are going somewhere, they're going into an environment that isn't necessarily permissive. So one of the principal things you have to do is ensure that you are taking deliberate measures and steps to protect yourself and protect your force. And we do that. Two of the things that we do to help us with that are we do what we call vulnerability assessments, and we do threat assessments. And a vulnerability assessment, the intent there is to actually step outside your boundaries and then look back at yourself and look at yourself from the perspective of the enemy and see, can you identify certain vulnerabilities? Where are those? So for example, you may be familiar with the green zone in Baghdad. So if you were to go outside the green zone in Baghdad and look back in and you were to see a gap in the wall, that someone could easily go into, well, certainly that's a vulnerability, and you're going to want to address that. When we do the threat assessment, you're actually inside, looking out, and trying to identify, what is the threat, perhaps that might be motivated to come through that wall and do you some harm. Perhaps in the example that we're talking about now, the threat isn't necessarily only outside, but also inside, so we've got to be sort of clever about how we do that. So we've taken our methodology of force protection, doing threat assessments, doing vulnerability assessments, pulling teams together, and if they're not experts, then we train them, send them for training, and then have them do these things for us so that we can identify where we can intervene, points of intervention, strategies for intervention. We can identify the risk, and we can pursue methodologies for mitigating that risk. As was mentioned earlier, one of the things that the leadership can do is to make the decisions about applying resources to those things and doing that smartly. And sometimes that means taking resources from somewhere else. But if it's in priority and it's important, then you have to make those tough decisions, particularly in the current environment. Once you've applied the resources, then the leadership really has to be there. One of the things we do in the military is when you are a leader, when you are a commander, you go to the most vulnerable point. That's where you need to be to ensure success and to embolden and enable your people. And that's why I think it's so impressive that all of you are here putting your shoulder to the wheel on this particular issue. Another example I want to share with you on terms of vulnerability or a threat assessment is, and I think this might be relevant to your dorms, for example. is when we look into the barracks, and sometimes it's right there in front of your face, but if you haven't have a deliberate method to look at it, you miss it. We may have one of our non-commissioned officers go into a barracks, and he notices that we have a young woman or a young man who just recently arrived, and they're down at the end of the hallway, and they're in a room without a roommate. There's nobody in the rooms around them that are vacant, and certainly that puts them in a vulnerable position. And you can just correct that. Put them down, where the students come through and there's somebody there checking the ID card. So those things sound really simple, but if you don't have a deliberate process to look at them, they can just go right past you, in a busy day. So it has to be deliberate, and it has to be transparent. And that can be very difficult to be transparent because you're trying to collect as much information as you can, but you're also, of course, trying to protect personal information and protected information. Another example I'll share with you is the challenge that we've had with improvised explosives devices. And you've got to wonder, what does that have to do with this? Well, the methodology, again, I think we're applying pretty successfully. So the improvised explosive device was our very adaptive enemy over the last 10 or 12 years has produced makeshift bombs out of homemade explosives and just buried them in the ground in a plastic oil jug, cooking oil jug, and then they detonate it with a garage door opener or something, and really was just having devastating effect to our soldiers. So when that appeared and hit unacceptable levels for us, we responded to it initially by helping the victim of the attack to survive. How do we treat those people, and how do we increase their survival rates and help them to recover, live a good life, and become more resilient in the long run? We then moved to the event itself and said, how do we help them to survive the explosion? So we, thanks to the American people and Congress, put a lot of money into creating protective equipment, these large vehicles, armored vehicles that have lots of protection on them. And the technologies just kept evolving so that we could withstand one of the blasts and survive it with less injury. And then eventually, once we understood it enough, we said, well, why don't we prevent it from happening in the first place? And you just can't start there because you don't know enough about it. But once you have been studying the problem long enough, and once you have the benefit of the great research that Alan just shared with us, then you understand your environment enough that you can begin to think about what is our intervention and our prevention programs. So we began to look at what's motivating the people to put the IED in the ground in the first place, who's financing them, where's the leadership coming from, where's the training coming from, and how do we get after the network and prevent it from happening in the first place. You do that without taking your eye off of the ball of treating them afterwards or surviving it when it does happen. And that's the comprehensive approach that I think I share Alan's view on that. So you can take that methodology, certainly, and apply it to the case of sexual assault, in all forms of sexual assault. So, I would encourage that analogy, and I think it works. It's been working for us. Those are some of the things, some of the methodologies that we've been applying that have been working. And then finally, the last thing is just fusion, and Alan mentioned this as well. Fusion really is, in our hierarchical environments, fusion is that opportunity to find horizontal problems, to horizontal solutions to horizontal problems. And bringing in all the stakeholders, all the people who have information, so that you can layer that information on top of one another, the medical people, the legal people, the investigators, the chain of command in our case, or the leadership on the campus, the students themselves or the soldiers. Pull them together, layer that information on top of each other, and then you can see where do you have gaps, where do you have seams, or where do you have redundancies, and you have an over application of resources that you might be able to redirect somewhere else and have a more effective program. So that fusion is terribly important as well. And again, it's transparency, and that's where it really gets hard, because now you have a hard time. Some of those people just are unwilling or they're unable because of authorities to share that kind of information. That's when, frankly, we have to go back to our state senators, our governors, Congress, and say, help us out with this. We do have to protect the information, but there's certain people who ought to be able to have access to it so that we can really get after this. and be effective. And I think that it's possible to find that balance. We've done all these things, and we created something down at Joint Base Lewis-McChord that Stephanie will refer to later, which we call the SHARP, our Sexual Harassment and Assault Response Program Resource Center. And when we first stood it up, we had two purposes for it. One was that's where we're going to fuse all these people. So we brought all those agencies together, the experts together. And the other reason we set it up was we had heard that the soldiers who were victims of an assault or harassment were reluctant to go to their chain of command, their local chain of command, to report that for the reasons that we've already discussed earlier this morning. So we thought, well, we'll have an independent place that they can go away and perhaps be more comfortable. It worked for a short period of time. We had some folks coming in. And then what we noticed over the last few months is that far fewer people are coming in there. But it's actually good news, because at the same time, we've been able to change the culture down in the units to create that trust. So the number of incidents being reported is actually going up, but they're not coming into the resource center, they're going into their units. So again, it's the comprehensive approach and doing the analysis and the assessments, trying to understand what are we looking at. And sometimes it looks like you're failing, but you're not necessarily failing. And of course, you got to look at it over time. Because as was mentioned earlier, 3 months later, if it rebounds, you know that you really haven't done something that's enduring and long-lasting. Another point that Alan brought up, and I'll just address this one quickly, is we do a Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and I share his view. I mean, the military is very good. Every month we've got something, and it's African American Heritage Month, or Pacific Islander Heritage Month, or Native American, or whatever it might be. And we've gotten to the point where most of those things truly are celebrations. They're celebrations of successes that we've had, how far we have come, contributions that are now being made by that demographic. And I asked myself, do we really need to keep doing these? And then I found myself speaking at the sexual assault one, thinking, we don't have anything to celebrate, And I suspect we didn't have much to celebrate when we started the one for Native Americans either. But it's a part of changing the culture. It's a part about informing us to be careful about the jokes you tell, the movies you watch, the things you read, the things that you reinforce or don't reinforce. And over time, you change the culture, and then you get to the point where you do have a celebration. We're not there yet. We are not ready to celebrate our successes in sexual assault, but I do encourage you to do what you can while we're here and to follow up with us. So please ask these folks for business cards so that you can stay in touch with them. I think we do have a lot in common. I think we're more alike than we are different, frankly. I think we do share a common challenge. I think we can get after it, and I think it's terribly important that we get after it together, because it doesn't happen only on JBLM, and it doesn't happen only on your campus. This is a community thing. It doesn't stop at the boundaries, of the athletic facility or at the boundaries of our post. So with that, I would just leave you with some encouragement to participate in the breakout session that follows with the military folks. We've got a number of them here, and they're here representing all the echelons I just described. So we have people who know about life in the barracks, which is analogous to life in the dorms, and at the academic department level, and at the corps level and division level. So we have all those folks represented there. They'll share with you their experiences and what they've done, and I hope that you take full advantage of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Major General Dahl, and thank you to all of our leaders from the military community for being here. I know this is an investment of your time. We greatly appreciate you sharing your expertise. Just want to touch base on a couple of housekeeping things. Next are the breakout sessions. As Major General Dahl just mentioned, one of those will include learning from the military. That is going to be in the Lyceum. The Lyceum is on the first floor, south end of this building. Best practices in engaging faculty is right next to that. That's Hub 145. And then you have rape myths and rape culture, bystander intervention, and cultural perspectives, all of which will be on the 3rd floor, again on the south end, so not too far away. After that, we will reconvene here for lunch at 12:15. That will continue until 1 o'clock. And the last thing is, Dr. Berkowitz mentioned his book. For those who are interested in perhaps getting a copy, completing your evaluations, we'll give you a raffle ticket, and we will raffle one of his books off this afternoon. So hopefully that is good incentive to complete an evaluation. If you have questions on how to get around on this campus, feel free to come and see me. I used to direct the tour program. Thank you, and have a good time in the breakout sessions.